Today is Independence Day, and is there anything more American than talking about UFOs? Okay, maybe rodeos. Probably rodeos are more American than UFOs. But today, we're going to talk about UFOs. We're going to go through all the news in the world of UAP, UFO, alien disclosure, or as we like to call it, confirmation. And if we have time, we'll even get into the very, very wild alien retrieval technician thread over at Fortune. Let's start off with this post from Chris Mellon. He says, Congress's determination to investigate credible reports that the U.S. government has recovered off-world tech is immensely important. I'm confident that if they continue on this path and obtain the data already provided to the intelligence community inspector general, the truth will come to light. So this seems to be an ongoing theme right about now. We already know David Grush has come forward and he's made some incredible claims, and it has brought the skeptics and the debunkers out of the woodwork. It seems like since 2017, this has been a battle of people interested in this topic versus the debunkers and the skeptics who are also interested in this topic. And in 2017, of course, what we saw was the release of the three big videos, the gimbal video, the Go Fast video, and the FLIR 1 video. And even with those videos being released and eventually confirmed by the Pentagon as having been taken by fighter pilots, having been confirmed by radar and other systems analysts on ships like the USS Princeton, even with all of these eyewitnesses, people like Commander David Fravor, we still saw the skeptics and the debunkers saying, no, these trained observers, the best fighter pilots in the world, arguably, they don't know what they're talking about. What they saw certainly was not any kind of UAP. And they pretty much come to that conclusion no matter what your definition of a UAP is. So we're going to have skepticism and debunking on this topic no matter what we produce. I firmly believe that Joe Biden could give a press conference with a tall gray alien standing next to him, and the debunkers would instantly be on UFO Twitter talking about how this was obviously some kind of a psyop. I'm utterly convinced there is absolutely no evidence that can come to light that will satisfy the debunkers. They'll be debunking this, even if we have aliens setting up colonies in North America. They'll be debunking the existence of those colonies for decades before it's accepted by that whole skeptic debunking community. But that's part of the fun of it. What I think is interesting about what's going on here is that a lot of people who are sort of central to this disclosure movement that's going on, they all seem to know what the Inspector General of the intelligence community has already seen from David Grush. It seems like everybody's already seen it. These people like Chris Mellon, he obviously knows what Dave Grush brought to light. People like Lou Elizondo probably know. We have members of Congress in the Gang of Eight who obviously already know. We also have other people in Congress like Representative Tim Burchett and Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, who sit on the two intelligence committees in the Senate and the House, who have also obviously seen a bunch of this information. We know they've seen this information because they're giving interviews and saying, hey, I have to be careful what I talk about here. But in the case of Representative Burchett, he's basically said 100%, I now know we are not alone, and basically indicates that the things he's seen are pretty mind-blowing. So why can't they talk about this? If all these people in Congress and others know about this information, why can't they talk about it? Because it's classified. And they're hearing about these things in classified briefings in SCIFs somewhere. So they can't actually talk about it. Now you've got this growing sort of cadre of people who outside of the aerospace contractors and whatever level of people in the Department of Defense actually know about this. You've got this other cadre of people sort of outside of that now since 2017 who know about the existence of this information and know what it is. It's just a question of when this will be released to the public and to what extent. We know in July they're going to have some kind of hearing. They're aiming for the end of July for some kind of hearing. The hope is that there will be both a public and a classified hearing. And obviously, I guess we can expect if David Grush is a part of that public hearing, he's probably going to be willing to talk about the same things he talked about publicly in his interview with Ross Coulthart. And those were pretty big claims he laid down in that interview. Dead alien pilots, a dozen or more alien craft. So this is going to be the first time we hear about these things in actual congressional testimony. Will this be a watershed moment for disclosure or confirmation? Probably not. Probably just like 2017, the news will come and the people who are paying attention will be amazed by it. And 98% of the news consuming public will never even see the news, or if they do, they'll just kind of brush it off, just like with the 2017 videos, unfortunately. One thing we do know is that Congress is talking to more whistleblowers than just David Grush. We've heard that now from Marco Rubio and also from Mike Gallagher here on the Pat McAfee show. So they're not saying exactly how many whistleblowers they're talking to, and they're definitely not naming the whistleblowers. And this is all to protect those whistleblowers. They want them to actually get to the hearing, to actually appear at the hearing. And it sounds like everybody keeps indicating that the whistleblowers are concerned for, some of them are still working for the government, some of them previously working for the government, but they're all concerned about things like their jobs and their security clearances and even their own personal safety. So obviously, a lot of people, even some members of Congress, are trying to get this news out, trying to get this information out in the public. What's the big holdup? What are the theories behind the drive toward secrecy? That's the secrecy that's been going on for almost 80 years now, if we only go back to the time of Roswell. Why all the secrecy? What are the theories behind the secrecy? I think one of the most interesting explanations is provided by Lou Elizondo here in I think his most recent appearance on the Theories of Everything podcast with Kurt Jaimungal. Maybe it was his first appearance. I think he's been on twice. I'm not sure if this is the first or the second appearance. But here he basically explains, hey, put on your hat and put on your 1950s U.S. general hat. Pretend like you're a U.S. general in the 1950s. You've just had to confront the reality of Roswell. He doesn't say that, but he's, the 1950s kind of implies that. And your main concern is the national security of the United States. You now know that aliens are a thing. There are three possibilities. The aliens are good, the aliens are bad, the aliens are neutral. And he's like, the aliens haven't really shown us that they're good. They haven't really done anything to help us out. They haven't come down and cured cancer or anything. I'm putting words in his mouth here, but they haven't come down and cured any diseases. They haven't come down and gave us free energy or any of those things. They haven't really shown us that they're good. So that leaves bad and neutral. And we do know they've done surveillance on our nuclear facilities. And he indicates this could be seen as battlefield preparations. So if you're a 1950s general and you know all these things are going on and your main concern is national security, you might say to yourself, okay, we don't know that they're good. So that means they're either bad or neutral. And they seem to be doing surveillance on our nuclear inventory, which could possibly be battlefield preparation. We have to assume there's some possibility, even if it's only 10%, that maybe they show up here in force someday. And here's where you may disagree with this theory. But what he describes is, hey, if in this 1950s general, if he had made this decision to expose all of this to the public, and the public freaks out, and they start preparing for an alien invasion, maybe that accelerates the timeline for that alien invasion. Basically, it becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like everybody's scared. They find out there are aliens. They're much more technologically sophisticated than us. We have absolutely nothing that could stop them if they do invade. So people start preparing for, a possible alien invasion. The aliens see this and they say to themselves, hey, we can invade now or we can invade later. Because they're preparing, that means they'll be, even if they're technologically inferior to us, they might be more prepared for the invasion. They might make it more difficult for us if we wait another 50 years. So we might as well just invade now. This is the explanation given here. I could imagine a general in the 1950s, who maybe lived through both world wars. He's used to fighting, enemies in the Pacific and in the European theaters. That's his experience. It's the 1950s. They're not as sophisticated as we are now. There's no internet. There's not this giant collection of information and a way for people to consume information and come to a consensus, on the best way to deal with things, all these kind of things. All you've got is, radio, television. I could see a general in the 1950s coming to this conclusion like, hey, we don't know. We don't know what these aliens are planning. We don't know if they're good, bad, or neutral, but there's not really a good reason to inform humanity about the existence of these aliens if there's even a small chance they might be preparing to invade, if they might be surveilling our nuclear inventory, doing battlefield preparations. There's not really a good reason to tell the public because it's just going to freak out the public and they're going to start, like digging bunkers in their backyards, which is going to alert the aliens. And maybe that makes the aliens invade early, which has a severe drawback in that humanity doesn't have a chance to catch up. Maybe this is a decision they made in the 1950s. And for the last 70 years, they've been trying to catch up technologically in the shadows. Behind this veil of secrecy, all they've been doing is trying to catch up, which all kind of fits the theme of technological progress, in the entire world. We had this period, talked about it in the last video, the last Alien Rumor Rundown. We had this period from 1880 or 1900 until the moon landing, where there was this immense amount of technological progress. We went from basically not really having automobiles, humans not being able to fly, to flying planes around the world, dropping nuclear weapons, and also landing on the moon. And all this happened in the first half of the last century. In the second half of the last century, we can certainly point to certain categories of technological progress like the internet and AI, things like this. But you didn't have this giant leap going from not having cars and planes to the 1950s and 60s. Maybe that's because that's just our perception. Maybe we have made immense technological progress from the 1960s to 2023. It's just that it's all happened in secret because it was all related to trying to catch up to this off-world technology that they first encountered in a very real way, sort of in that 1930s, 1940s, 1950s period. Because let's face it, we would have a lot of catching up to do if any of this technology that people say exists actually exists. For instance, here are some photos of a metallic looking orb above the skyline of Bangkok. No idea whether these are real or fake or manipulated, but if anything like this is real, one thing we can say for sure is that we don't seem to have any technology at all like this. Here's another one. Again, no idea if this is real or not, but this seems to be a level of technology that we do not have at our disposal. At least our governments aren't publicly acknowledging that they have anything like this at their disposal. And this video is even more interesting. Again, no idea if this is real or not. This purports to be a couple of French fighter jets trying to chase this UFO, and the UFO does exactly what you think. It's kind of hanging out and then it's out of there. The jets sort of do a flyby, but no chance whatsoever of actually catching up to the UFO. It just kind of changes positions as they go by, and then eventually the UFO decides they do another flyby, and the UFO eventually just decides to get out of there and it's gone. So, what do these defense contractors, these aerospace companies, what do they have to say for themselves in the face of these allegations? Well, we recently saw Lockheed Martin Skunk Works, which is the division of Lockheed Martin that a lot of people point to related to some of these allegations. Recently saw them celebrating 80 years. So, if you go down here, they're like, hey, we made the P-80 back in the 40s, then we made the U-2. Then we made the SR-71 Blackbird. Then we started doing stealth fighter stuff. Then we kind of, unveiled the stealth fighter. Then we had the F-22. Then we had the X-35. Then we had the X-56. Then they show us this. I can't tell if this is a drone pretending to be a fighter jet or a fighter jet pretending to be a drone, but they say they're continuing to redefine impossible. And then there's this little tiny line at the end of this long page that says, of course, there are programs that we can't share yet. But there was some other news kind of in the UAP Twitter sphere at the same time as this that indicated that there was something that Lockheed Martin wanted to share. Australian journalist Ross Coulthart, the same guy who interviewed David Grush, was also recently on Theories of Everything with Kurt Jaimungal, and he had something very interesting to say. He's heard, he says from a reliable source, that a certain aerospace company, who everyone is speculating to be Lockheed, is trying to divest itself of an alien craft. They're trying to give this alien craft to another aerospace company because they now have to deal with those provisions that the Senate Intelligence Committee inserted into the 2024 Intelligence Authorization Act. Those provisions said that if you are a government contractor and you have some kind of non-Earth or other exotic materials, you have to let Arrow know within, I think it was 90 days. And then I believe you have to actually give those materials to Arrow within 180 days of enactment of the 2024 Intelligence Authorization Act. This is very smart. Who knows if anything will come of this, but this is very smart. I think the senators like Kirsten Gillibrand, who wrote those provisions, they knew which strings to pull. Those would be the purse strings, because all of it is tied to funding of those programs that those defense contractors rely on. Here's what Senator Harry Reid, who was a very important figure in this whole disclosure confirmation process we're kind of going through right now, this journey we're still undergoing. Here's what he had to say to the New Yorker in 2021 about Lockheed Martin and possible retrieved materials. He said, I was told, according to this report, I was told for decades that Lockheed had some of these retrieved materials, and I tried to get, as I recalled, a classified approval by the Pentagon to have me go look at the stuff. They would not approve that, Reid continued. I don't know what all the numbers were, what kind of classification it was, but they would not give that to me. This is relevant. A very senior U.S. senator was under the impression that Lockheed did, in fact, have retrieved materials. Here's something currently making the rounds on UFO Twitter that I've actually never seen myself before. This post says, old videotape Bob, he's referring to Bob Lazar, old videotape Bob made telling his story and everything he knew. This was supposed to protect him on the basis that if anything happened to him, it would prove his story was real. So this is a really interesting historical artifact. It's a very grainy, looks like late 80s VHS videotape production where Bob Lazar basically takes you through, drawings of the UFOs he says he worked on and a complete explanation of what he calls Gravity A and Gravity B. And I might be mixing up which one is which, but one of them I think is Gravity B. He describes as the gravity that we experience here on Earth. But he says it's easily interruptible. Like you can jump in the air and you can, sort of escape gravity. You can interrupt gravity. You can defy gravity for a moment just by jumping in the air. That's sort of one type of gravity, the type of gravity that, planets exert on, objects like us humans. And then he says there's another type of gravity. It's a gravity that sort of operates on a much more micro scale, and it has to do with sort of atomic particles. And where he's going to go with this, if you followed the Bob Lazar story all these years, either through Rogan's podcasts concerning this or all of the huge amount of discussion and material that happened prior to Rogan actually having Lazar on his show, he explains that the way these craft are powered is that you have this element 115, which he talks about in this video, which was made clear back in the 80s. Element 115, which we eventually started calling ununpentium and then eventually muscovium. Element 115 wasn't really discovered until a little bit after the year 2000. It was like the year 2003, and it was sort of officially added to the periodic table in something like 2015. We now call it muscovium, but before it was officially named by the team that discovered it, they named it after the city of Moscow because that's where their laboratory was, where they discovered it. It was discovered by a joint Russian and American team. But prior to calling it muscovium, we called it ununpentium. And there was this element wasn't even known to exist to normal science until its discovery in 2003. Bob Lazar is here talking about an element 115 clear back in the 1980s. And he basically says, hey, what happens is you take this element 115, you put it in a small reactor, which is in the middle of the ship. And then I think he's saying you sort of bombard it with, some type of, subatomic or atomic particle. And it does two things. It actually gives off this gravity A. I believe it's gravity A. He says it gives off. And it also is the power source for the entire UFO. If you've watched the episode of the Rogan podcast with Bob Lazar, you know what comes next. He says there are gravity wave amplifiers, sort of, I believe, in the bottom of the UFO, and those are used to sort of amplify and direct this gravity A wave that's produced by the bombardment of the element 115. And these sort of amplifiers can be moved directionally. So you sort of shoot the gravity wave in whatever direction you want to move in. And then, of course, because it's gravity, the spacecraft is actually like sort of sucked into that area you shot the gravity wave into. In this video, he actually explains it as lift, but I like the sort of being sucked toward the gravity kind of explanation. In any case, in part 2, he gets into things that he says he learned from briefs he was given to explain the source of this alien technology. He says that this came from sort of these small gray aliens. I think he says they're like 3.5 to 4 feet tall. They come from the Zeta Reticuli star system, and he even identifies which planet. I think it's planet 3 or 4 in this. I believe it's a binary star system, but very, very wild stuff. The weirdest part about these tapes, if you watch them, is that he doesn't seem to exhibit any of the hallmarks of a person who is spinning a fictional yarn or like lying to you. He's just like very matter-of-factly talking about scientific facts, or at least it seems that way. He's either like an incredibly peculiar liar, or he's just describing scientific facts as he knows them. Bob Lazar said 2 other very interesting things in that video. He tried to explain how aliens could possibly travel these like very large interstellar distances that would be required for them to go from their sort of home solar systems to Earth. And he does the trick that we've seen subsequently in a lot of different sci-fi movies, where you sort of say, hey, gravity bends space-time, and then you take the piece of paper and you fold over the piece of paper, and sort of in the movies they'll often like push a pencil or a pen through the piece of paper to show that you don't travel in a straight line across the entire piece of paper. You sort of bend space and time and then sort of travel, across the fold kind of thing. The other interesting thing he said was that at the time he was recording, there were sort of 2 theories about what gravity is. One being that gravity operates through gravitons, which are kind of these particles. He said that theory is nonsense, and that actually gravity was a wave. this is interesting because he was obviously talking about this in the 1980s. And when you Google, when did we discover that gravity is a wave? You come up with websites like this. This is a NASA science website, that explains that Einstein was sort of, predicting the wave nature of gravity. And then they say, how do we actually know that gravitational waves exist? In 2015, scientists detected gravitational waves for the very first time using an instrument they call LIGO, Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory, which is actually two different facilities in Louisiana and in Washington. And in 2015, they detected the gravitational wave effects of two black holes crashing into each other. 2015 is long after Bob Lazar's VHS tape. 2015 is also long after something else that's been making the rounds on UFO Twitter right now, and that's reports of this paper. So I haven't seen anybody actually produce the whole paper, just this abstract, but even just the abstract of this paper says some very interesting things. So this shows a copyright of 2003. So this paper, abstract at least, says there are two types of gravitational fields. One is DC gravity, which is local and static, such as the Earth's gravity. Another is AC gravity, which is radiation and can transport far away without energy decay, such as gravitational waves. So we have this paper in 2003 describing gravity in terms of waves, and also talking about AC gravity and DC gravity, which sound an awful lot like Bob Lazar's A gravity and B gravity. And they even sort of describe them the same way. One having to do with the Earth's gravity, and later on in the abstract, when you get out to it, they start talking about AC gravitational field being explored by calculation of the gravitational radiation field excited by the induced nuclear angular dipole moments in a macroscopic quantum high TC superconductivity system. I have no idea what all those words together mean, but it sounds like it could be pretty similar to Bob Lazar's A gravity and B gravity. What's also interesting about this little abstract is it doesn't just say copyright 2003. It says copyright 2003 by Ning Li, published by the MITRE Corporation with permission. Who is the MITRE Corporation? Well, if you Google the address given in that abstract, you find this location in Huntsville, Alabama for the MITRE Corporation. And you might also know that there is a whole lot of aerospace contracting going on in Huntsville, Alabama. And in fact, this MITRE facility, the address given on that abstract, is only 0.4 miles, a 2-minute drive from Lockheed Martin Space in Huntsville. In the next one, we will cover this very wild Fortune alien technology retrieval technician thread. I hope you have a fantastic 4th of July, and I'll talk to you soon.